Welcome to Crimewatch. Not our usual location, but then this isn't our usual programme. This is Crimewatch Solved.
Over the next hour, you'll see how the police cracked some of their most difficult cases. Cases which Crimewatch featured and your phone calls helped to solve.
Firth appeared to target the younger age bracket of boys. He would actually share a tent with the boys whilst he was away on camping expeditions, and it was during the night that he would carry out his indecent assault on these boys.
Clearly this was a contract killing. I'd appeal to anyone who could tell me the name of the killer and perhaps the man or woman that contracted this killing.
He made a quick glance and then went through to the passage, and that's when I shot him.
I was really, really concerned that somewhere in our inquiry we may have overlooked him. He might have been standing there right in front of us, and through some sort of human error, we'd missed him.
Dennis is just on the outside of the phone box, just obviously waiting to pick his moment. Right at the top of the screen, you can just about see Dennis running up to Gavin and stabbing him in the back.
That one day, everything changed. Life changed completely for us.
First tonight, the M25 rapist. For over 13 months, he abducted and terrorised girls from the age of 10 to women in their 50s.
The police investigation sparked the biggest manhunt since the Yorkshire Ripper in the late 70s and early 80s. But while the Ripper hunt went on for years, the M25 rapist was caught in months, soon after an appeal on Crimewatch.
The police had the benefit of cutting-edge forensics, DNA profiling, and the technology to make sense of huge numbers of leads.
But, crucially, they had that call from a Crimewatch viewer.
The man rushed across the road and grabbed hold of her and virtually frog-marched her across the field to an area of bushes where he carried out a really bad attack on the girl. And at one point, he held her hand and said to her, "If anybody sees us, they'll think I'm your dad." But the girl was so terrified, obviously even just walking alongside him, she was too frightened to do anything. He then took her to another location where he again assaulted her. I mean, the poor little girl thought she was going to die. And then finally, he took her to the third location where he raped her. It was an awful ordeal for the young child.
Afterwards, he took some of the girl's clothing. Then he abandoned her. Presumably, he knew her clothes were likely to contain his DNA and wanted to get rid of them. But the police still managed to recover enough DNA from the scene to build a full genetic profile. And Adam Gregory was one of the advisors who built a behavioural offender profile.
In trying to determine whether the offender was a paedophile or not, then you can look at the way in which he deals with the victim, and what was quite stark was that the victim wasn't treated like a young girl at all from start to finish. She could have been any age. If you just look at what he was saying, what he was doing, what he was expecting the victim to do, some of the language that he was using towards her, it seemed like an adult conversation. There was no real evidence there that he'd practiced talking to that target age group of 10-year-old girls. It was very much more about someone that wanted to control a female who was in some way acceptable to him as an offender. There was an expectation that he would have carried out previous sexual offences. We were just as confident that he would have carried out violent offences. We were very confident that he would have been known to police for something. I think what's most disturbing for me is that you really get a sense that he thoroughly enjoyed what he was doing, and that's quite unusual when you look at sexual offending. It's not often that you see someone that really seems to embrace the role of the rapist, and that was both unusual and obviously quite worrying.
So with a behaviour profile and DNA, police sifted and then swabbed over 3,000 men in the local area and others further afield with a history of sexual offences. But there wasn't a match. The rapist seems to have gone to ground until the summer of 2002.
We've worked on this inquiry for 8 months, and suddenly, out of the blue, I get a telephone call from the SIO in Surrey telling me that a woman had been raped and that there was a link, a forensic link with ours. Unbelievably, I mean, this man raped 2 women in one day, one in Surrey in the morning, and then in the afternoon goes on and rapes a second one. I mean, it's just unheard of. Just to give you an indication of the sort of man we were hunting for, after one attack on a woman, he actually took her phone and looked up Mum, and then phoned Mum and said to her,
"You know your daughter with the long hair? I've just raped her. But you'll hear about that later."
I was on Wimbledon Common at about lunchtime that day, giving both my dogs a walk, which was something I did most days. About 5 minutes into my walk, all of a sudden, just totally out of the blue, without hearing anything, a person just slammed into the back of me. All of a sudden, there was this voice saying to me, "Don't scream and you won't get hurt." And the next thing I knew, I'd been pushed down onto the ground, and this person was on top of me. And so I called for my dogs. I'd always thought that my dogs would save me. But the dogs didn't come. He grabbed my hair and pulled my head up, and he said, "Can you see this?" And he put a knife in front of my eyes. And then he said, "Can you feel this?" And he put the knife to the side of my throat. And he said, in the coldest, most malicious voice, "This is a knife, and I'm going to use it on you." All I could think about was my family. I just kept on seeing the faces of my family, and I hadn't known there'd been any rapes. So all I could think about a man and a knife on Wimbledon Common was Rachel Nickel, which, although it had been 10 years ago, was a frenzied knife attack on a dog walker. And so I thought maybe it was him come back. I was lying there with my T-shirt over my head, totally exposed, totally humiliated. And the next thing I knew was he grabbed hold of my trousers and started slashing at them with the knife. At that point I'd gone into, my brain had sort of closed down. It's hard to describe, but it's almost as if you go on to another level when you know that, your life's going. And I thought it was probably slashing me as well, but I wasn't feeling anything. But that was just, hearing the slashing was just, he just had me totally in his control. After he raped me, he said he had to clean up, and he started wiping with my T-shirt to, I assumed, to get rid of any evidence of him. And he said to me, "Wait there for 5 minutes and don't move, or I'll come back and slit your throat." I think he did kill part of me that day. He killed the person I was before.
And next day, he struck again. The police found themselves playing catch-up.
A 100 police from forces across southern England are searching for a serial rapist.
In one case, he used the victim's mobile. He called her mother and told her he'd just raped her daughter.
We were looking that he might strike anywhere in the country. And, I can't begin to describe the sort of way I felt. It was you know, almost as if we'd failed and we should have caught him, because, you know, I regretted one rape taking place, and, you know, I was really, really concerned that somewhere in our inquiry we may have overlooked him. He might have been standing there right in front of us, you know, in the inquiry, and through some sort of error, human error, we'd missed him. You know, as the series of rapes developed, more and more forces became involved. We had 5 police forces from across the southeast. You know, it was an absolutely huge, huge manhunt. It's been reported that it's the biggest since the Yorkshire Ripper, and that definitely is the case.
Now it was a multi-force investigation, and Assistant Chief Constable David Kelly took over all charge.
Here's a case of a very dangerous offender. I want to be able to warn girls and women about this man. We knew he was about medium height. He spoke with what was described as a northern Geordie accent. He smelt of drink, he smelt of cigarettes. He had hands that were described as being tanned and leathery, so we thought we were dealing with some sort of outdoor worker. There were certain patterns to the way that he operated. For instance, he always attacked from behind. He would always choose the same sort of locations, and they were sort of areas of green between sort of built-up areas, if you like. From the nature of the attacks, it couldn't have been that he was just in the right place at the right time, or the wrong time for the victims. He had to have been there and waiting there for some time. He had to have chosen his areas of attack. Clearly, what we were looking for was somebody with unaccounted time.
The rapist did indeed have time on his hands. The police didn't yet know it, but he was a railway worker whose job took him all over the southeast of England. What's more, he'd operate alone. He inspected train tracks and could clock on or off at any time and without anyone knowing.
I think that he chose his locations, and then whoever came along into that location was a potential victim. So it was hugely frustrating, particularly knowing that he was going to attack again, or very much thinking that he was going to attack again, and it was going to be some other victim was going to have to suffer. And you know, whereas rape is a dreadful offence, you know, at any time, that rape of children as young as 10 years of age is, well, it just beggars belief.
His next victim was another child. She was 13 years old and from Woking. He grabbed her from her bicycle and raped her. Then he raped a 14-year-old, but she managed to get a glimpse of his face. Police constructed an EFIT and came to Crimewatch, where we put the clues together and narrowed down the field.
Tonight on Crimewatch, latest clues on one of the country's most prolific serial rapists.
The EFIT was the breakthrough. It produced hundreds of calls and new leads. One of them was from Kathy Sherwood.
Both me and my husband was watching Crimewatch, and my husband said, "That's Anthony."
Anthony was Anthony Imiela. He and his wife lived across the road from Kathy and her husband. The neighbours had become friends.
Hi, Anthony.
Hello.
How are you doing, mate? All right?
I'm all right. Who are you?
I'm better now, thanks. It's all clear. Your job all right?
Yeah.
See you soon, mate.
Take care.
He seemed absolutely fine. He seemed a nice person in the beginning.
Kathy had no reason to think there was anything strange about Anthony until...
Anthony came over one day, asked if he could borrow some tools for the car, and I said yes, of course. He trying to get hold of me and trying to kiss me.
What are you doing? Come on. No, what about Christine? Get off!
I said to him, "What are you doing it for? Don't do it. Just please leave." And then one morning I was cleaning my windows and Anthony opened his street door and he was completely naked and he started to masturbate. I didn't know what to do. I was absolutely shocked. I was kind of numb. I didn't know what to think. And then my telephone rang and he said that for me not to tell Christine and not to tell my husband he was sick and he needed help. After watching Crimewatch and seeing the E-Fit and hearing what they said about him smelling of tobacco, it came to me when he grabbed hold of me and kissed me. I remembered the smell of tobacco as he grabbed me, and I thought, it is him.
Hello? I think I know who the M25 rapist is.
We had some 10,000 responses, and each and every one of those had to be followed up. One of those phone calls named Imiela as the suspect. Our officers went round to Imiela's house, we interviewed him, and we took a sample from him.
Open your mouth, please.
Because of the sheer scale of the DNA testing, it would be over a week before they had Imiela's results back. And that gave him the chance to carry out one more attack.
Would you like a lift, love?
No thanks, because it's only round the corner.
Get in, or I'll follow you and I'll kill you.
He was making comments to the young girl as, it's all right for you, you've got a family, you've got a life, mine's all over. I mean, that just shows the sort of contemptible way that he behaved.
Let me go, please let me go.
Shut up. If you tell anyone, I'll find you and kill you.
Keeping her for 5 hours, knowing that within days he was going to be arrested, he still went on and did that. You know, it's pitiful.
As soon as his DNA results came back, the police knew Imiela was the rapist, and he was arrested the same evening.
The night he was arrested, we had a phone call to say that he'd been caught, and I just leapt out of bed. I was so ecstatic that he'd finally been caught, and we could stop looking over our shoulders and could stop waiting to hear when the next attack had taken place. I was just overjoyed.
This is police footage of Imiela being charged. Despite overwhelming forensic evidence, he pleaded not guilty. He claimed he was gay, so couldn't possibly have carried out the attacks, and that meant his victims would have to give evidence.
I can tell you that when the videotapes of the 10-year-old victims were played in court, it had a profound impact on everyone that was sitting around me, and I can only imagine what effect it had on members of the jury. Seeing a 10-year-old victim clutching her teddy bear and having to recount this dreadful ordeal that she'd been through.
On the 4th of March 2004 at Maidstone Crown Court, Anthony Imiela was given 7 concurrent life sentences.
I've dealt with a lot of people over the years, and even some of the worst offenders have one redeeming feature. Anthony Imiela doesn't. That's what I think of him.
Dennis Chianta was a crack addict from North London. His life revolved around scoring drugs and finding money to score drugs. But even crack addicts have to eat sometime.
Cheeseburger, please.
Oi, wait your turn. I've been queuing here for ages. Can I have a large Big Mac meal with a Coke?
We're off. You coming?
Yeah.
In effect, what you've got is Gavin being served and the 2 girls coming in to leave the restaurant with him. And they all go out. And as they go out, there's eye contact between the 2 of them. And a shout comes up from Dennis.
You should learn some manners.
What are you talking about? There wasn't a queue?
Yeah, there was, and you jumped it.
Get lost, will you?
Hey, you can't talk to me like that.
But what exactly is your problem?
And just at this point, you see the bag go down in front of him, and Dennis is challenged by Gavin as to whether he's going to produce a knife. No doubt he thinks better of it in a big public place. The girls break it up and Gavin goes to leave with the two girls, and he turns left down the Seven Sisters Road towards Finsbury Park. And at this point, Dennis, he's made an order, he's given money over, but doesn't wait for it, so he just demands his change back.
Give me my change. Come on, give me the change.
He's angry at this point and then leaves and goes in the same direction. And here you see Gavin and the two girls walking up Seven Sisters Road in the direction of Finsbury Park.
Yeah, and his mate Trevor.
Oh, yeah.
You Trevor, don't you?
I do.
Dennis is just on the outside of the phone box, just obviously waiting to pick his moment. Right at the top of the screen, you can just about see Dennis running up to Gavin and stabbing him in the back. And Gavin, unfortunately, only has minutes to live.
I was down in Holloway at church and didn't realise that until afterwards that in actual fact I was only about 200 yards from where the incident happened.
The offender had paid for a meal. He hadn't waited to collect it, but he paid for it with a £10 note. So all the £10 notes at that particular till were recovered. They were fingerprinted. We obviously conducted house-to-house inquiries in the area and got as much local publicity as we could. We were 5 weeks into the investigation when we came to Crimewatch, but we really were stalled. We had, at that time, no idea who the offender was.
A senseless murder which began with a row in McDonald's.
Help me. Call an ambulance. Oh, jeez. Julie.
Can you hear me?
We did have a call from one viewer who named Dennis Chianta, or gave us a Christian name that led us to identify Dennis Chianta. This person had seen the reconstruction, seen the conduct of the offender in McDonald's, shouting at the staff, demanding his change. And that is what prompted that caller to ring us, because the caller had thought that there were definite echoes of Dennis Chianta's conduct there.
Give me my change. Come on, give me my change.
What we did on the morning of Wednesday the 29th of October last year, we decided to execute search warrants at the addresses in Holloway that we thought that he might be at. So we simultaneously raided 3 properties looking for him, and we found him in the third of those properties, one in Highgate, where he'd been living with a partner.
Nobody move! Everyone remain still!
And I saw his reaction to being told that he was arrested for this murder, and he looked absolutely terrified. The colour drained from his cheeks, and it was really then that I was more sure than ever that he'd committed the murder in Seven Sisters Road.
Can I just ask you to state your full name, please?
Dennis Chianta.
Would you say your clothing in general is more casual than formal?
No comment.
Because again, your posture is very similar to the person in the video. What do you have to say about that?
No comment.
This person ran up to him and plunged a knife into the middle of his back. Was that person you?
No comment.
That one day everything changed. Life changed completely for us. You know, that one morning when this happened. And even after 8 months, it's still very difficult to, you know, to cope with it. Going into the court today, it will be quite horrendous, really, you know, just to come face to face with the person that had murdered Gavin, really. I don't know how I feel when I do eventually come face to face with him.
On the 21st of June this year, Doreen and her family were faced with Dennis Chianta for a 4-week trial. Evidence was heard from facial mapping experts to show that the face of the man in McDonald's was the same as Chianta's whilst in custody, and there was more evidence from the CCTV.
We approached a podiatrist, Hayden Kelly, and supplied him with the footage from McDonald's, footage of the man on the street, together with footage of Dennis Chianta in custody. And he found that the man in McDonald's, the man on the street and Chianta all had a deformity in the right knee, and that the toes on the left foot were pointing outwards and compensating for this deformity in the right knee in a very unusual way. And because of the unusualness of the gait, Hayden Kelly concluded that there could be strong support that they were one and the same person. The trial ended on Monday, July the 19th. The jury retired just at around 11 o'clock on that Monday to consider their verdict, and they came back with a majority verdict of 11-1 guilty. Chianta's reaction, certainly visibly shocked, uttered a few words about how he hadn't done it, but visibly shocked when he was, the jury came back with a guilty verdict.
If that person wasn't you, and I'd expect you to be saying, it wasn't me, I was here, or I was with so-and-so, and they can tell you it wasn't me. But you're sat there just saying no comment. So I'm giving you an opportunity in the interview now to tell me, were you involved in that incident?
No comment.
I'm still often surprised it's not just the recent crimes that Crimewatch helps to solve, but old ones too, and sometimes very old ones. In 1976, a newsagent, Geoffrey Small, was murdered. The killer was never caught. The case went cold.
26 years later, the police received a tip-off. They reopened the investigation, Crimewatch reconstructed the murder, and the killer was watching.
My father was a very fun person. He was very good with kids. He was very good with my sister and I. We had very fond memories a couple of years before where we were very much together as a family. We had good holidays, very fun times, very fun times.
Geoffrey Small was murdered nearly 28 years ago at his home behind his shop in Sutton, Surrey.
Morning.
Good morning.
The copper who led the inquiry is now retired. He's Detective Superintendent Bevan Moss, and the case has always haunted him.
It was a shocking scene that I encountered walking into the house because there was blood everywhere, all over the sink and the floor, and with Geoffrey Small's body lying there, just an ordinary shopkeeper having met his death in this fashion was appalling. I went round to examine the back of the premises, and I found that he'd taken out a small diamond piece of glass from the back window, ground floor window, got in, climbed into the house, sat on the settee and waited for Geoffrey Small to arrive. I was amazed when I went into the house initially that there were no trace of any shell cases. Although 7 bullets had been fired, these had been meticulously picked up, but he missed 2, which forensic found, lodged in the top of the cooker hood, which helped us to identify the weapon. It was apparent to me that the person using this gun must have been a professional, because the weapon had a reputation for a very fierce ejection of the cartridges, which throws the weapon all over the place. So he's got to be a good marksman to be able to handle it properly.
Detectives first thought Geoffrey Small may have been mistaken for a criminal called Bertie Small. It was rumoured there was a contract out on Bertie Small because he'd informed on several villains.
Packet of embassy, yeah?
Yeah, fine, sir.
There you go.
What's more, Geoffrey seemed to live a blameless life.
Fine, thank you. Very well. How about you?
We discovered that he had had a small affair with a lady, and we discovered also that a relative of this lady had been passing along the road roughly about the time that the murder had taken place. But this particular person we found didn't have own any guns, had no gun training, and was very unlikely to have been responsible. I was really disappointed when we had to wind down the investigation, particularly for the small family, who I felt that we hadn't provided them with some solution to who'd murdered their loved one.
For over a quarter of a century, the case remained on file until Jeffrey's small sister wrote to the police asking if it could be re-examined.
As a result of that letter, the police acted on some information that had been provided to the police, naming Alan Savage.
Alan Savage was a career criminal with a long list of previous convictions that stretched back to the 40s. They included burglary, possession of firearms and rape.
The original scene of the crime, there was a footmark left. A male footmark was left in a flower bed by the point of entry at the rear of the premises. And that was, as I recall, a size 5 male shoe mark, which was very unusual at the time and would have represented a small amount of the adult population. The person that originally come forward and provided the information subsequently gave us a witness statement, but that alone wasn't good enough for us, and we wanted to go to Crimewatch to see if we could find any other witness who could help implicate Alan Savage, or for that matter anyone else in this investigation.
It would be nice for him to see his children grown up with their own children. You know, I wonder, would he be proud of me? I mean, I've done nothing special, but, you know, would he be proud of me the way I've turned out and the way my brothers turned out?
We didn't expect the result that we had, in as much as Alan Savage's confession came, as he said, as a result of seeing Jeffrey Small's daughter making an appeal on Crimewatch. It was important for us to provide some evidence of corroboration of his involvement, and we were able to do that with him being videoed down at the original murder scene.
Around this area, where this fence is, there was a wall about 1 metre high into the car park. That's the way I came over. I can't remember that door being there, but this is the window I went through into the back room. I think there was a settee under the window which I climbed onto, and I stayed in this room until Jeffrey came in, which was through the door we've just come through into the passage there. He then went through the other door into what I then remember was the kitchen. Jeffrey was in the middle of the kitchen, where he put his bag down on the floor, and then he must have heard me coming through the door. He made a quick glance and then went through to the passage, and that's when I shot him.
And the price he was paid for Jeffrey's life? £700.
Initially, Alan Savage had provided information and evidence implicating the man that had paid him to carry this offence out. By now, Alan Savage was in his 70s, physically ill, an elderly man. He'd already pleaded guilty to the offence himself. Although he'd implicated another individual, I don't think he wanted the trauma of going through, giving evidence at court, and any implications that might have for him in the future.
Alan Savage suffers from terminal cancer and knows he'll die in jail, but it looks like he'll carry a terrible secret to his grave.
It's nearly 28 years now, and the pain doesn't go away because we have no resolution. We have a man who's admitted that he shot my father, and he admitted he did it for money, but he has been unwilling to testify against the contractor, who really is the real killer. The gunman was very much like the gun. He was a tool. He didn't know us. He didn't know our father. He just did it because he was paid to do it. But the real reason my father is dead is because of the man who's still walking the streets. We obviously know who's responsible to this. So do the police. So we are just looking as a family for those people that do know. They could bring this to an end. They should look at their loyalties.
The appeals that usually generate the most calls are where the victims are very vulnerable. People who wouldn't normally come forward to help the police feel moved to do so.
Our next case is a prime example. It concerns a career criminal, Johnny Doran, among whose many victims were Kenneth and Flora Pritchard.
Thank you.
For Ken and Flora, it was a normal day. Flora had been out to the shops, she'd put a bet on at the bookies for Ken, and she'd come back home and made Ken some lunch, a sandwich. And actually, when the doorbell rang, they were watching the racing on the television.
They're under starters' orders. They're off.
Man and a quarter in front of them. Junique perhaps a little bit slower than the others to stride away. Roger and Man taking a fierce hold early on. Cat campaign Silver towards the stand side.
You from the council?
Yeah, I've come about the dam.
Well, I never looked to see whether he'd got a badge on, you know. It was all on the spur of the moment. I says, oh, come in.
Come in.
The distraction burglary was carried out by two men. The taller one left the door slightly ajar so the smaller man and the leader of the gang, Johnny Doran, could slip in unnoticed.
Hid some of the things out the cupboard.
I started getting a few things out of the cupboard, and he went to a cupboard on the wall, and as soon as he touched this tin, I said to him, "You're not a council worker."
Ken was being burgled.
The taller of the two offenders set about Ken and pushed him around and slapped him. Ken was trying to protect Flora.
Johnny Doran collected the money from his accomplice, then searched the flat for more while the taller man stayed in the living room.
Flora managed to get to the window and tried to scream out of the window, and that really upset the two of them.
He kept me in my chair. I was trying to get out all the while because he told me to keep quiet, and I wouldn't. He said, "You're going to keep quiet?" I said, "No, I'm not." I went parched, you know, my lips, and I said, "Oh, I want a drink." And I thought, oh, perhaps if I can get out this chair, you know, and go in the kitchen, I could make a dash like for the door.
I want a drink of water.
He'd fetch the water, this one, and he'd got his hand covered.
Can you give me £20?
No, I can't. You've got it all.
The second offender made a search of all the rooms in the flat, and then he emerged from the bathroom and started threatening Flora, and in fact he threatened to gag her.
He bought a cloth, and you know, to put over my mouth. So I struggled with it so that it wouldn't go on my mouth. And then the other one, he got a pink cloth in his hand. I'm sure it was pink. He said to me, "Shall I wipe your face?" I said, "Don't you touch me."
On most of the attacks, the violence was not directly connected with the stealing. Many times the money had already been stolen, but the victim was attacked and beaten, only for a bloodlust.
Oh, leave me alone!
He stood up in front of me with these four legs facing me, and I did go quiet then. And I thought, oh dear, what's he going to do to me?
Say goodbye to her, Ken.
Having stolen cash from all over the flat, suddenly they ran out of the living room. Ken and Flora weren't aware that they'd actually taken their keys, and they locked them in on the way out and disappeared.
And then Ken says, "Found the police, Flo." And I found the police, and when I turned round, I'd heard this bump, you know. And I saw Ken. He was on his knees, in between the table and the chair, and his head was resting by the wall, you know. So I pulled his head away from the wall, and I said, "Ken, are you all right?" I said it twice, and he didn't answer. And then the police came, and the paramedics, and the policeman took me over to a neighbour and made me a mug of tea. And then a policewoman came in to me. I says, "No." I says, "It's not true." I says, "Oh dear, what am I going to do without him?"
One of the early thrusts of the investigation was to identify the other attacks that this team of men were responsible for. And that is simply a question of networking, by going back through records locally, then regionally, and then at a national level. It's the signature behaviours in attacks like this, the things that the offenders do and say, that give the game away, that enable us to draw up a picture, a map of all the offences they've committed. We discovered that this team used a number of techniques. 2 or 3 of the victims certainly were followed home. They were simply seen in the street, probably presented themselves as frail individuals, and were followed to their door. We investigated 20 or more robberies, and they all took place in the Midlands: Warwickshire, Leicestershire, Derbyshire, Nottinghamshire, the West Midlands itself.
The team would concentrate on one area, carry out a series of attacks, then move on to a fresh location. By using a criminal profiler and studying their signature behaviour, the police came to the conclusion the men responsible were travellers.
Traditionally, it's been very difficult for the police to penetrate the travelling community and get assistance in investigations like this. We felt the best way, probably the only way, to get a meaningful response from the travelling community was to approach Crimewatch, so that we could broadcast, and those individuals within the travelling community that wanted to give assistance could contact the police discreetly.
The thing is, Clive, about these 2 men, they're not just cruel, they're cowards, aren't they? And you think they might have committed, what, as many as 9 similar burglaries? Johnny Doran was named by 4 different travellers, but now the police had to find him.
We had to develop a detailed family tree of the Doran family to begin to have an understanding of where he might be. We had to research the migratory patterns of the travelling community, and there is some predictability there, and we were confident after the broadcast that they were in the northwest corner of England. That's where we started looking, Manchester and Liverpool. Johnny Doran was born and raised within the travelling community. He was essentially feral, living entirely on his wits and the proceeds of his crimes, and every few months he'd move on to avoid detection. And it's quite clear that when he was a boy, he was recruited by criminals practising at that time this type of offence, and he learned the trade, grew up into an adult and became the team leader, and not only that, developed beyond just stealing and moved into violence.
The police eventually tracked him to Manchester, where he was arrested.
He was a skilled liar, and he spent the first 48 hours in police custody actually trying to convince us he was somebody else entirely. He's never given us an indication who his accomplice might be, and he showed no remorse for the attacks either whilst he was being interviewed by detectives or indeed when he was sentenced at court.
I had letters and cards and flowers off strangers, and I had Jason bought a big envelope one day, and he says, "Flo, you got 30 cards here," and it was from some school down the south, and all the children, they were from about 6 and 5 and all ages, and they'd all sent a little card. He was a good husband. 50 years we'd have been married. I think it was made for me, and I was made for him, you know. Because sometimes things are like that, aren't they?
Now to someone who has been caught, and for terrible crimes. But what a chase, and what a time it took. It's not surprising it made headlines at the time. A pillar of the community who turned out to have a double life.
Good morning, boys.
Morning, sir.
Hello, Community Protection and Investigation Unit. DS Leanne Davidson speaking.
I'm needing some advice about something that happened to me a long time ago.
Can I ask what happened to you?
Well, it was something really bad.
Was it some sort of abuse?
Yeah.
It was extremely difficult for him. The man was very distressed. This is something that he had, had been preying on his mind for a lengthy period of time during his adult life was having a significant impact on his personal life as well as his family life.
Can I come round and meet with you?
I'm not getting in trouble or anything, am I?
No.
Okay, it's Old Man Street. I guess you can come round tomorrow evening.
Okay.
I'm just worried about this guy. You know, he's a teacher.
Can you tell me his name?
Yeah. Paul Firth.
Paul Firth was a deputy headmaster. He'd taught in Aberdeen since the early 1970s, and in his spare time, he helped out with the Scouts.
We had to look at finding out whether he was still employed as a teacher and also as a Scout leader in order that we could ensure that no other children would be left at risk. Firth appeared to target the younger age bracket of boys. The majority of his victims were aged between 10 and 11 years. Some were slightly younger, and it became quite apparent that the lads that he had targeted were all relatively quiet, unassuming boys who perhaps wouldn't necessarily be vocal and outspoken and tell somebody what was happening to them.
The picture we were by now beginning to build up was of a calculating individual who appeared to live dual lives, one in which he was a responsible and respected member of the community, and another in which he indulged in this targeting or grooming of vulnerable boys for indecent and immoral purposes.
Firth would actually share a tent with the boys whilst he was away on camping expeditions, and it was during the night that he would carry out his indecent assaults on these boys when they were on their own with him.
I think that having won the trust of youngsters who looked up to him, who adored him, it was never difficult for him to get physically close to his victims. For many of these boys, to be able to share a tent with Paul Firth was seen as a reward. We began to come to the conclusion that we were dealing with potentially a fairly dangerous individual.
So you say that didn't happen?
Absolutely not.
You're quite positive about that?
Yes.
But the investigation turned up several people who would testify, and Paul Firth was charged with 19 sexual offences. Because he was a deputy headmaster, the court assumed he was unlikely to abscond, and he was given bail. He saw his chance and ran.
Hello, DS Davidson. Thanks. Firth disappeared. I don't believe this.
As we carried out more and more investigation into where Paul Firth had gone, it became apparent that he'd sold his house. It became apparent that he may well have left the UK in his boat, and that boat was well fitted out with some sophisticated navigating equipment, which could take him quite a long distance away from the UK, and obviously a long distance away from UK justice, which I think was the most important priority for Paul Firth.
The police had no idea where he was. Interpol had been alerted, but there were no sightings. In fact, he'd fled to northern Morocco, to the port of Tangier. There, he thought he was untouchable. Scotland doesn't have an extradition treaty with Morocco. While in Tangier, Firth lived off the £80,000 sale of his Scottish home. He also made money teaching English to local boys. So, while his former victims wondered whether he'd ever be rearrested, Firth could while away his days, enjoying Morocco's eternal summer.
Maybe we can widen the search for Firth.
Although Crimewatch obviously wasn't quite the last throw of the dice, we really were pinning an awful lot on a response.
Look familiar. Paul Firth used to be a teacher and a scout leader, but now he's wanted for sexual offences against children.
And that one response was just exactly what we were looking for.
Now, he could be living on his yacht, which is called Ramallo.
A couple from Edinburgh told us that they had actually met Paul Firth, described an encounter with him in the port of Tangier in Morocco. And from their description of Paul Firth, it was pretty obvious to us that this was a genuine sighting. They specifically mentioned the yacht Romalo, and that absolutely clinched it.
There was a great deal of elation that we had eventually located where he'd actually fled to. That was tempered by the fact that we knew it would be a difficult job getting him back to this country to face justice.
Living on his boat, safe from extradition, Paul Firth seemed beyond the reach of justice, a world away from all the victims he'd left behind in Aberdeen.
They had the awful job of having to wait for 3 years to find out whether Firth was going to be found and whether he was going to be brought back to face justice for what he'd done.
If he chose to do so, he could have hidden in Tangier forever or sailed away into obscurity. But his very freedom was his undoing. He started taking trips, and some of them went into Spanish waters off the North African enclave of Ceuta. And while in Spanish territory, he had to show his passport.
Hola, senor.
Hola. A check was carried out on him, and the Spanish authorities realised that they were in actual fact dealing with a fugitive from Scottish justice and that he was a wanted man.
Firth was arrested and held by the Spanish while Grampian police prepared his extradition papers. But the Spanish statute of limitations only allowed Firth to be extradited on the two most recent offences.
I had a concern that this whole case was sending out a message to some people that if you want to escape justice in the northeast of Scotland or anywhere else in the UK for that matter, all you need to do is leave the country and lie low for a little while and you're home and dry. I think what this proved quite conclusively is that we will never give up.
It took 12 months, but eventually he was handed over at the cells in Madrid airport.
Hello, Firth. Nice to see you again. How are you doing?
Fine, fine. I'm sorry for all the trouble I've put you through. I just needed to get away to decide what I was going to do. I'm sure when we get back to Scotland, I can sort all this out.
Okay. Time to go.
His behaviour hadn't changed at all. He was still very much arrogant, extremely condescending. He didn't seem at all concerned that he was about to be returned to Scotland to face trial for the crimes that he'd allegedly committed.
I saw Paul Firth the day after he was taken back from Madrid to Aberdeen.
Hello, Mr. Firth. I'm Chief Inspector Harry Thornton.
Oh, you took your time to find me. I don't think you were really trying, were you?
Really?
Well, I won't be in custody much longer.
I understand you've been in Morocco.
I began to realise what many of the victims had told us about his aloofness, his complete disregard for the feelings of other people, his ability on the one hand to be very charming, but with not one shred of remorse or feeling for victims. In fact, very much the impression that we'd got the wrong man.
I have the utmost respect for the people that came forward throughout the course of this investigation. It was an extremely brave thing for them to do, very traumatic for them. However, without their assistance and strength of character, we would not have been able to secure a conviction for Firth, and he may still be at large, abusing children.
And our thoughts are with the men who weren't allowed to give evidence in court. But over the years, your calls have helped the police lock up 52 sex offenders. And next month, on the 21st of September, you'll have the chance to solve more crimes.
But remember the sort of cases that we feature tonight, especially attacks by strangers. They get publicity, they get our attention because, thankfully, they are very rare. So don't have nightmares, do sleep well. Good night.
Good night.